If you're saying I was just a
I
piece
won't
of
answer
meat.
that question. That's not what it is. These are loving relationships.
Yeah.
Sex is part of it, but that's not a focus.
But
Welcome back to Brown House Secrets, the place where we uncover the hidden truths, the untold emotions, and the painful reality behind the Brown family's journey. If you think you've seen everything on Sister Wives, think again. Because here, we go deeper. Tonight's story isn't just about a breakup. It isn't just about a marriage ending. It's about a woman who gave 33 years of her life, only to be told she was never truly loved. It's about betrayal, silence, and the kind of heartbreak that doesn't just break a marriage, it breaks a soul. This is the devastating end of Kody and Meri Brown. Music fades into a low, haunting note. Voiceover. Meri once believed she was the foundation of this family. The first wife. The loyal partner. The one who stood beside Kody in the very beginning, when dreams of a big polygamist family felt magical, full of hope and purpose. But now? That dream has been reduced to ashes. We hear it straight from Meri herself. Kody actually said to me, "I have no desire, Meri, to have a relationship with you. You can stick around, you can come visit me and Robin and the kids if you want, but we're never going to have a marriage relationship anymore." Imagine being told that, by the man you've given your youth, your faith, your loyalty to. By the man who once promised eternity. This is where Meri's story begins to unravel. Music builds softly. For nearly a decade, Kody had been pulling away. Step by step, year by year, he stripped the marriage of intimacy, of affection, of hope. He left Meri in limbo, clinging to a spiritual bond he refused to nurture. And yet, when she finally found the courage to say, "We're done," the weight of those words carried 33 years of pain. Voiceover. The breakup wasn't sudden. It wasn't explosive. It was worse. It was the slow death of a marriage, smothered by silence, indifference, and broken promises. Meri recalls how Kody led her on, how he once said, "When we move to Flagstaff, this will be a new beginning for us." She believed him. She wanted to believe that the man she married at 19, the man she thought she knew, still existed somewhere behind his hardened eyes. But there was no new beginning. Only more distance. Voiceover. And as the dream of Coyote Pass slipped through their fingers, so too did the dream of their family. Kody admitted openly, "We're not really one big family anymore, we're more like people who own property." That single line told fans everything they needed to know. The dream was dead. The family was fractured. And Meri? She was just a piece of property he no longer wanted. Pause. Soft piano note. But Meri was not blind. She had seen it coming. She felt the rejection, the withdrawal, the emotional starvation. She said, "For the past nearly decade, he has pulled himself away from me completely emotionally. Why in the world would I want to be tied to somebody eternally who doesn't want me?" That sentence, heavy, raw, heartbreaking, reveals the core of her pain. This wasn't just about earthbound marriage. This was about eternity. In her faith, when she married Kody, she believed it was forever. A covenant, a spiritual bond, sealed beyond this life. But when she realized he didn't want her, not in this life, not in the next, she knew she had to sever the bond. She had to ask for what her church called a release. And that release was the equivalent of a divorce. Voiceover. Think about it, 3 decades of devotion, all reduced to one phone call, one meeting, one signature. After 33 years of commitment, she walked into a room of church leaders and said, "It's time to let me go." The church granted it. On the grounds of abandonment. That word, abandonment, cut like a knife. Kody hated it. He refused to see himself as the one who walked away. But for Meri? That was her truth. That was her reality. Music swells, haunting, mournful strings, voiceover. For years, Meri had been the one waiting. Waiting for a sign. Waiting for Kody to fight for her. Waiting for him to love her again. But the truth was brutal, he never would. He admitted it himself. "I felt like I had to marry her. I was affirming that I loved her, but I didn't. Can you imagine? Hearing that the love you believed in for 33 years was never truly real? For Meri, that confession wasn't just cruel. It was shattering. But here's where this story shifts. Because for the first time in decades, Meri is choosing herself. She is walking away. Not quietly, not invisibly, but with her head held high. Voiceover, she told the cameras, "I'm just starting fresh and new and single in me. I have a lot of plans, and I'm excited about what's to come." It's heartbreaking, yes. But it's also liberating. Because Meri Brown, the first wife, the forgotten wife, the rejected wife, is no longer defined by Kody. She is defined by her own strength. Music fades out into silence, voiceover, soft, reflective. This is only the beginning of Meri's story. The pain runs deep, the betrayal deeper still. But out of that pain, a new life is being. The silent cracks, betrayal, rejection, and Meri's breaking point. The deeper you look into Kody and Meri's story, the more haunting it becomes. Because this wasn't just a breakup. This wasn't just the unraveling of a marriage. This was the slow suffocation of a woman who once carried the family on her shoulders, only to be left in the shadows when she was no longer useful. Meri Brown was Kody's first wife, the one who stood at his side when he had nothing. She believed in him when he was still just a dreamer, with no fame, no fortune, no TV cameras. It was Meri who gave legitimacy to his vision of plural marriage. She welcomed Janelle, then Christine, helping to weave together the complicated beginnings of their family. She stood firm in her faith, proud of the calling she believed she had received. But behind the smiles and group interviews, there was another reality, one that Meri carried silently. Kody's attention began to scatter, his love spread thinner with each new wife. What was once hers alone was now divided. And though plural marriage meant sharing, Meri found herself sharing more than just time. She was sharing his heart, and slowly, she was losing it. By the time Robin entered the picture, the cracks in Meri and Kody's bond weren't just cracks anymore. They were deep canyons of distance, silence, and resentment. And instead of mending them, Kody poured all of his emotional energy into Robin. For Meri, the pain wasn't just that her husband was falling in love with someone else. It was the way he dismissed her, diminished her, and made her feel invisible. Years of being the loyal first wife had left her hollow, waiting for affection that never came, waiting for validation that never arrived. And then came the scandal that shattered everything. The infamous catfishing. In a moment of weakness, isolation, and deep emotional starvation, Meri reached outside her marriage. She didn't do it for physical connection, she did it for emotional survival. She needed someone to hear her, to see her, to remind her that she mattered. What she thought was a man interested in her turned out to be a cruel betrayal, a woman posing online, manipulating her pain, and exposing her loneliness to the world. When that story broke, the narrative quickly twisted. Fans called her desperate. Kody called her unfaithful. The family whispered about betrayal. But the truth was far more tragic. Meri hadn't betrayed Kody. Kody had betrayed her long before. For years, he had pulled away. For years, he had withheld affection. For years, he had treated her as though her only value was her position in the family tree, not the beating heart she carried. And when she stumbled, when her loneliness consumed her, instead of compassion, she was met with cold dismissal. In one of the most gut-wrenching moments ever captured on Sister Wives, Kody looked Meri in the eye and admitted something fans would never forget: he wasn't in love with her. He hadn't been for a very long time. He even confessed that the thought of intimacy with her felt like a form of betrayal, a statement that not only shocked viewers but devastated Meri. To hear your husband say you are unwanted, unworthy of touch, unworthy of love, it wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. Meri's tears told the story of decades of silence. She wasn't just grieving her marriage, she was grieving the years she had given to a man who now openly said he no longer wanted her. And yet, through it all, Meri stayed. Why? Because sometimes love doesn't let go easily. Sometimes, the hope of what once was, the memory of laughter, the promise of forever, the covenant before God, keeps a person chained to a relationship long after the love has died. Meri carried that hope like a heavy stone on her back. She clung to it, even when it crushed her spirit. She believed that maybe one day Kody would remember the woman she was to him at the beginning. Maybe one day he would look at her and see the wife who built his dream alongside him. But Kody never did. Instead, the distance only grew. Publicly, he justified his actions as honesty. Privately, he built his life around Robin. The more Meri tried to reach out, the more he pushed away. The more she stayed loyal, the more he ignored her. And yet, the irony was undeniable. While Kody accused Meri of betrayal for her online relationship, he had been betraying her with neglect for decades. Betrayal doesn't always come as cheating. Sometimes betrayal is silence. Sometimes betrayal is indifference. Sometimes betrayal is looking at your partner and refusing to love them, even when they're begging you with their eyes. Fans watched Meri's spark dim over the years. The strong, outspoken first wife became quieter, smaller, almost invisible on the screen. In family gatherings, she sat alone. In confessionals, her words trembled with suppressed pain. And in her eyes, you could see it, the ache of someone who had been abandoned emotionally, long before she was abandoned physically. This was no longer a marriage. It was a prison of hope. But here's the most heartbreaking part: Meri wasn't just holding on to Kody. She was holding on to the family. To the dream. To the idea that if she let go, the whole structure of sister wives would collapse. And in some ways, she was right. Because when Meri eventually broke free, the house of cards came tumbling down. Part 2 leaves us at the edge of that breaking point. Meri is silenced, isolated, but still holding on. Kody is withdrawn, dismissive, and already living as if their marriage is over. The viewers can see it, the wives can feel it, but Meri is still trying to survive the loneliness. And the question that lingers is this: how long can a woman carry the weight of a marriage alone? How long before silence becomes unbearable? Because soon, Meri would face a decision that would change not just her life, but the course of the entire Brown family. The breaking point, Meri's release, Kody's rejection, and the end of a spiritual union, voice soft, heavy with weight. When a relationship ends, sometimes it doesn't end with screaming. Sometimes, it doesn't end with one dramatic fight. Sometimes, the end comes like a whisper. A slow, steady breaking down, year after year, until one day, you realize, there is nothing left to hold on to. And for Meri Brown, that day came. Meri's decision, the church release on camera, with her hands trembling and her voice shaking, Meri revealed what few had expected her to ever say. After decades of holding on, after decades of waiting for Kody to change, after decades of being told to be patient, to have faith, to sacrifice, Meri finally let go. She looked directly into the lens and admitted, "I've gone to my church leadership. I've asked for a release. Spiritually, I am no longer bound to Kody." It was a stunning confession. Not just because Meri had always been seen as the loyal one. Not just because she had endured so much longer than anyone thought she could. But because in their faith, a release isn't just paperwork. It is the sacred undoing of a covenant she once believed was eternal. It was the sound of a door closing. It was the end of a prayer that had gone unanswered. It was the death of a marriage, not legally, not in a courthouse, but in the heart of Meri Brown's spirit. Kody's response, the brutal honesty, and then, there was Kody. If viewers had hoped for softness, if they had expected even an ounce of grace, they were met instead with the raw, unfiltered cruelty that Kody had long been known for in private but rarely admitted so publicly. He said it without hesitation. He said it without shame. He said it as though it had been rehearsed 1,000 times in his head. "I don't feel love for Meri. I haven't for a long time. And I'm not going to pretend." Those words hit like a hammer. Because in them was the confirmation of everything Meri had quietly endured for years. The rejection. The abandonment. The knowledge that, no matter how hard she tried, no matter how much she gave, she would never be enough. And yet, even as Kody spoke those words, he failed to see the truth. That Meri, even in her brokenness, still carried dignity. That by releasing him, she had reclaimed her power. And that his words, instead of crushing her, only freed her further. The symbolism of the end for longtime viewers of Sister Wives, this moment wasn't just about Meri and Kody. It was about the collapse of a dream. This marriage had been the cornerstone of the Brown family. Meri had been the first wife, the one who stood beside Kody when he claimed he had a vision of building a vast plural family. She had believed him when he said love could be shared, that sacrifice was noble, that sisterhood was eternal. But in the end, that dream died. And when it died, it exposed something darker, that what Kody had built was never truly about unity. It was about control. It was about image. And it was about one man's need to be seen as a leader, even as his family crumbled around him. The power shift, the cameras caught it all. Meri's tears. Kody's coldness. The silence that filled the room after his confession. But what most viewers noticed was this, the shift in power. For years, Meri had been the one begging. The one asking for scraps of attention. The one trying to prove her worth. But in this moment, that dynamic shattered. Because Meri had walked away. She had chosen her release. She had chosen her peace. And suddenly, it wasn't Meri who was powerless. It was Kody. Because what power does a man have, when the woman he abandoned no longer needs his validation? The emotional fallout, the aftermath of this revelation rippled through the entire family. Christine watched with knowing eyes, remembering the day she too had walked away. Janelle, though still processing her own fractured relationship with Kody, silently applauded Meri's courage. And Robin, the last wife standing, realized that the family dream she had so often spoken about was crumbling faster than she could patch it together. For fans, the reaction was visceral. Social media lit up with support for Meri. Hashtags like #TeamMeri and #FreeMeri trended across platforms. Viewers wept as they watched her reclaim her voice after decades of silence. It was not just a breakup. It was a liberation. Narration reflection, voice solemn, steady, almost like a closing prayer, this was the breaking point. The day the Brown family's first marriage came to its final end. The day Meri Brown stopped being the silent, patient wife, and became something far stronger, a woman who chose herself. Kody thought his words would end the conversation. But in truth, Meri's release had already ended the marriage. And what was left was not despair, but the beginning of something new. Because sometimes, endings are not failures. The release and the rebirth. Narrator, gentle, reflective tone. Meri Brown once said, "I have to love myself more than I fear losing him." And those words, though spoken quietly, would become the anthem of her journey forward. For years, Meri lived in limbo. She was spiritually married, but emotionally abandoned. Bound by covenant, but left to starve in the silence of neglect. She lingered in the shadows of a family where her role was erased, where her voice was muted, and where her heart was dismissed. But in the wake of Kody's confession, his brutal admission that he no longer considered her a wife, something inside Meri broke free. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was no longer about convincing a man who had already moved on. This was about reclaiming herself. The church release. In polygamist culture, spiritual ties often carry more weight than legal paperwork. A divorce is not just about walking away, it is about being released. And so, with trembling hands but a steady heart, Meri asked for that release. Not from Kody, but from God. From the church that had once bound her to a covenant that had grown cold. It was symbolic, but it was powerful. For years, Meri had prayed for her husband to come back to her. But now, she prayed for release. Release from the ache. Release from the shame. Release from the cage of waiting. And for the first time, she felt peace. Kody's silence. Kody, on the other hand, said little. He framed the separation as inevitable, a simple fact of life. To him, the marriage had been dead for years. But that silence spoke volumes. He did not fight for her. He did not plead. He did not mourn. Instead, his silence became the sharpest rejection of all. And for Meri, that realization cut deeper than any argument could. Because sometimes the greatest pain is not in the shouting, but in the quiet confirmation that you were never chosen to begin with. Meri's awakening narrator, it is here that Meri's story turns, not toward tragedy, but toward transformation. When a woman has lived her entire life tethered to a man's approval, there comes a moment where she must choose, remain in the shadows, or step into her own light. Meri chose the light. She began to reclaim her independence financially, emotionally, spiritually. Her bed and breakfast became more than a business, it became a symbol of her autonomy. Every brick, every detail of that little inn represented the pieces of herself she was rebuilding. And as she opened its doors to the world, she quietly declared, "I am enough." The public Fallout fans watched in shock as the separation unfolded on screen. Viewers who had once pitted Meri now rallied behind her. Social media became a chorus of voices cheering her on. Finally, she's free. She deserves so much better. She carried pain with dignity. And yet, not all reactions were kind. Some criticized her for staying as long as she did, for enduring years of rejection in silence. But those who understood trauma, those who knew the weight of religious obligation, saw the truth. Meri was not weak. She was conditioned. She was loyal to a fault. And her endurance was not foolish, it was human. Her story resonated because it revealed the complicated reality of leaving not just a marriage, but an entire belief system. The contrast with Robin narrator, tone shifts, more serious while Meri was finding her footing. Robin stood silently in the background of it all. Robin, the legal wife. Robin, the last standing. Robin, the one who benefited most from Meri's sacrifice years earlier, when Meri divorced Kody legally so that he could marry Robin. And here was the bitter irony, Meri had once given up her legal status for the sake of Robin's children. She had surrendered her own place so that Robin could be protected. Yet when Meri needed protection, when she needed a sister-wife's support, Robin gave her none. This contrast became one of the sharpest points of criticism from fans. Because while Robin clung to her marriage, Meri was left to navigate heartbreak alone. And the audience saw the truth, Meri had been discarded, while Robin reigned as the unquestioned favorite. The pain of watching Kody move on, perhaps the hardest part for Meri, wasn't just the end of the marriage. It was watching Kody move on so effortlessly. Watching him give his energy, his love, his time, to another woman, while she starved for even the smallest scraps of attention. To love someone who has already chosen someone else is to die 1,000 deaths. And Meri endured those deaths in silence for years. But the day she walked away, she stopped dying. And she started living again. A woman reborn narrator, tone softens. Empowering Meri Brown is no longer just Kody's first wife. She is no longer the woman who was forgotten. She is no longer the afterthought in her own life. She is a woman reborn. Her laughter has returned. Her light has returned. And though the scars remain, they have become part of her strength. In leaving Kody, Meri did not lose herself. She found herself. And perhaps, that is the greatest victory of all. The public reckoning and Meri's awakening. The dust of Meri and Kody's breakup did not settle quietly. In fact, it erupted like a storm across the sister wives fandom. For years, fans had watched Meri remain silent, often seen in the background, her pain tucked behind polite smiles, her loyalty anchoring her to a man who no longer wanted her. Many wondered why she stayed, why she tolerated years of emotional neglect. But now, with the breakup finally acknowledged on screen, everything became painfully, undeniably clear. Viewers saw Kody's bluntness not as honesty, but as cruelty. His admission that he had no romantic feelings for Meri, and hadn't for years, landed like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a husband rejecting a wife, it was the erasure of decades of shared life. It was the rewriting of history. And fans were furious. Social media exploded. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, every corner of the internet was filled with people calling out Kody's coldness. Many pointed out that Meri had been there from the very beginning, helping Kody build this sprawling family, sacrificing her own dreams, carrying the weight of plural marriage while Kody chased new loves. And yet, instead of respect, she was left discarded. The phrase that echoed across fan spaces was simple but powerful: Meri deserved better. TLC's silence, then strategy behind the scenes. TLC faced its own dilemma. The Brown family was no longer the happy, quirky polygamist unit that had captivated viewers back in season 1. Instead, it was unraveling in real time. One wife after another was leaving, and the man at the center, Kody, was being exposed not as the charming patriarch, but as a controlling, bitter, and often vindictive figure. For TLC, the breakup was both a crisis and an opportunity. Ratings spiked every time Kody and Meri's strained marriage was addressed. Clips of their confessional interviews went viral, sparking debates across daytime talk shows, podcasts, and online fan forums. So, TLC leaned in.